I've been reading this book. I was listening to the Belief Hole podcast, and numerous times they've actually referenced this book, Disembodied Voices by Tim Marczenko, a Canadian author. And he compiles various stories and mythologies from all around the world about disembodied voices. And the majority of those voices, folklore, myth, and true stories, take place. I'll put the book here in my hand because I can't put it up there anymore. Various places around the world, but most of those places that the disembodied voices call to people and lure people into are forests. So I'm in the Ngāhere or Woodhill. Ngāhere is a te reo Māori word for forest. And even though this is a man-made forest of pine trees, it's still a forest, full of fallow deer. It's very close to Auckland. It's about half an hour from Auckland city, central city. It's a great read. As the brothers of the beliefhole.com podcast relate to this book many times, it is a great read. And Tim Marczenko has his own experience before he's 12 years old, and there's something to be said about that age, of hearing a disembodied voice in the woodland near his house where he grew up in Ontario, Ontario province in Canada. So I had my own disembodied voice experience. I've had a few of them in my life, but the most memorable one for me happened to me in Dunedin, in a house I was living in. After I had, in the early 1990s, in the 20th century, I had, up until that time, before I moved into my friend's place, in Manor Place, into the house, when my friend Richard Jones, invited me into his house to move in with him and his flatmates. This is at a time when I had just lost my job, my place to live, and my girlfriend in about 24 hours. I was a raging alcoholic, and when I let go of my alcoholism and I began to learn how to meditate, that came for me when I moved into the house in Manor Place in South Dunedin. And this particular house was old school. I'll put the book up here. Old school Coronation Street, like you find in the UK, kind of like industrial towns, where you had two apartments, houses next to each other with a brick wall that separated the two properties. Property. So there was a block of brick structures in South Dunedin, and I can say that from when I look at the architecture, it would have been probably built in the 1870s or 80s or 90s. This particular apartment block of houses, and I lived at the very end, towards the very end of the block of properties, towards the corner of the street. And the house next door to us was empty. It's been empty since I lived there. I lived there for almost 5-6 months, and the house next door to us was always empty. I never knew why until later on I discovered that our place next door was haunted. That's another story unto itself. But I had given up my drinking completely. I stopped drinking completely because the nature of my alcoholism was definitely dysfunctional and had caused in my life enormous problems. I knew that I had to stop drinking. I had to face my own demons. I had to face my own shadow. I had to face my discomfort, and in that process began the healing process towards knowing who I was. Because for so long I didn't know, because I was getting inebriated to a point where I was unable to know who I was and where I was. So when I learned how to meditate, rather than going to Queen Margaret Hospital in Hammer Springs, which I was going to go to for rehab, but I decided to learn how to meditate instead. I learned how to do breath counting, or mindfulness of breath, first and foremost. Then later on would learn metta bhavana, love and kindness meditation. And that 8-week course I did with this lay Tibetan monk living in Dunedin. So when I learned how to do metta bhavana and mindfulness of breath, not long after the course had finished, I was practicing mindfulness of breath in the morning, then Metabhavana at night before I used to go to sleep in my bedroom. One night I had hung out with the flatmates in the lounge, and often we'd sit in the lounge together in front of, we had a little fireplace, and in these old buildings, the fireplaces, the really small ornate fireplaces that don't give off a lot of heat, hence they were built in the 1800s. They don't give off a lot of heat, but they're very ornate, very shallow. And so you'd have a little fireplace where you put firewood into it, and you have to bring the grate on top of the chimney over the top of the fire for the heat to radiate out into the room and to warm the room up. So we had the fireplace going at the time, and we were all sitting in the lounge, and we decided to pass around a joint. We had a few joints, and we smoked a few joints, and so I was pretty stoned. But for me, being stoned is not an excuse from my experience. I can't say this was an auditory hallucination, because it went well beyond auditory for me. It was more of a feeling. It was more of a tactile feeling what happened to me. Even though I heard this voice, and I will continue with the story and tell you the story, it wasn't just an auditory hallucination due to the fact that I was stoned. No. I've been stoned for a very long time. Not at that moment, not for my life, but I had smoked a lot of weed up until that moment, so I knew what an auditory hallucination was. I knew I had never really had any physical, visual hallucinations before, or auditory hallucinations before smoking weed. Not for a long time, and I was smoking a lot of weed at this time in my life, but not to the point where I was overdoing it, right? Those were the years before. The years before this moment, when I learned how to meditate, I began to slowly wean myself off all drugs altogether, to a point where I was straight edge for many years. Because the meditation gave me all that I needed in regards to that sense of connection. So we had passed around a few joints in this room, and within an hour or two of us hanging out talking, I felt quite tired and wanted to retire and go to bed. So I went back to my room, and my nightly routine was I'd kneel down next to my bed on my zazen stool, my zazen Japanese meditation stool. I would kneel down on that, put my legs beneath the stool, sit on the stool, and meditate for at least half an hour every night, practicing Metabhavana meditation, which is loving kindness meditation for various people in my life, including myself and those who I crossed and who I perceived that I crossed, and those who I perceived that I'd hurt or done wrong to. So I would go through this process of meditation and send loving kindness to people that I thought that I had crossed or pissed off or had hurt in some way, to begin my healing process. So in meditation, and I would often sink into a deep place of stillness, and my body would literally dissolve, and all I would have was this awareness. And in that awareness, there was no form, only the substance of my energetic awareness, my consciousness. That's all I could feel, was a sense of presence, consciousness, right? Which belays the fact that what I experienced next was absolutely, in that moment, unusual, but extremely, in that moment as well, I had to come out of my deep meditation to come back to a point where I realized what had just happened. It took me a few minutes for this experience to happen. When I got back to a place of awareness of the body, then I began to freak out, right? So I'm in this place of deep meditation. I'm very quiet, very still, pouring out this love into the unified field, into the fabric of consciousness, collective consciousness, towards an individual who I thought I crossed. And I hear this voice, and it says my name so close to my head, so close to my ear, that if it was a physical form, it would have been that close to my eardrum. And it whispered my name. But it didn't just whisper it, it poured the name. And like it didn't say Phareus, it said my birth name that I was christened with, which is Paul. And it leant into me. Whatever this entity was, it leant into me, and it said my name like this. So it lingered right next to me, and it said my name in my ear, right next to me. And it didn't feel malicious. It just felt like a presence next to me, right? And I'm in a deep state of meditation, so I hear this, and I come out of my meditation space back into my body in a way that expands into my form, and then I realize just how close this, whatever it was next to me. With my eyes closed, whatever it was on its knees or bending down to me to whisper my name in my ear, right? And I come out of my meditation, slowly come out of it, open up my eyes and turn to the right, thinking it must have been my flatmates, either Brent, Rob, or Jimmy, the 3 guys I live with, but the door was fucking locked, so they couldn't get into my room. And I'm sitting there by candlelight meditating. I look to my right, where the noise had came from, where the voice had came from, and there's no one there. There's no one there. And I'm looking at the space, and I feel my hairs on the back of my nape and my skin, the goosebump, the goose flesh across my entire body. There's someone or something in the room with me. I can feel it. And I get up off the stool, I bring the stool over, put it to the corner of the room, flick on the fucking light, and I leave the room. I'm like, holy fuck. I go downstairs, everyone else is in bed asleep. I go downstairs, make a cup of tea, and I'm shaking. I'm literally shaking. Like, it scared the shit out of me. It would be many years later before I went back into a practice of meditation. That's how much it scared me, this disembodied voice. That's how much it scared me. It scared the fucking bejesus out of me. It knew my name, as Tim Marczenko says, they know your name. The disembodied voices. It knew my name. My birth name, but the name I chose for myself, Fareus. It knew my birth name. And it called me that name, whatever it was. And it was a masculine voice. It wasn't a feminine voice. It was a masculine voice. And it scared the fucking bejesus out of me, literally. And that was my most memorable experience of a disembodied voice. And when I went back to meditation years later, I never had the same experience again. And this time I knew if it happened for me, I'm able to deal with it in a very different way because of the gnosis, the knowledge, the comprehension, the experiences in my life, the place I have in regards to my sense of connection to my Creator, the lack of fear that I have around these experiences. But I haven't had one since in regards to that experience, meditating, hearing a voice. I felt presences around me, most definitely, but never that someone kneeling or something kneeling down next to me and speaking in my ear like that. That was fucking terrifying. And of course, when you're in that deep state of meditation, you're simply in the level of that wellspring of connectivity and expansion. When you have an experience like that and you have to come out of the meditation, in my experience, come out of it and then fill your body up and then realize just how fucking close whatever it was next to my body, that's even more of an invasion of your own personal privacy and your personal space if you look at it like that, right? If you have a strong boundary, which I didn't for a very long time, very, very long time. And as a consequence of that, for me, I do feel as well, seeing that I had a strong boundary, I've got strong boundaries now, I don't have those experiences because I don't allow those energies into my life or into my space, my personal space, like I did back then. Now, what Tim says around the nature of a lot of these disembodied voices luring children from up to about the age of 12 years old kind of makes sense. Because when you get to 12, 13, you hit puberty. And the energy of a child before puberty, if you follow the work of David Icke and others as well who look at the more satanic, energetic influences and the energies that move through people that work with those energies, people that work with satanic forces and dark occult forces, they want to prey upon, most importantly, the energy of children up to puberty, because the energy of children is very powerful. So these disembodied voices, whatever they are, and there's many myths, many stories, and many mythoses, and many accounts of stories of people having experiences up until the age of 12 in this book. Men and women who have disembodied voices that call, how's this for crazy too, often will call 3 times. 3 times. Now, if you know about commerce and the legal system, you have to do everything 3 times for it to put it into place. If you're writing notices, you write a notice of conditional acceptance. If you want to rebuke or rebut something, then a notice of default if it isn't replied to, and then a final notice in commerce, right? The 3s. They call your name 3 times, and if you don't answer, they're gone. Usually they're gone. But there are stories of some beings or disembodied voices from around the world that call people more than 3 times. But often, all around the world, it's 3 times that they will call to people. Which brings me to a really interesting perspective and a very interesting thing I thought about, which kind of came with reading this book, is that when I talk about the nature of I did the video about in Porongia about the Patuparehere, and the man that I met hitchhiking through the Te Urarewa, who dropped me off at the walkway when I began to walk around Lake Waikato Moana, and his experience of what he considered to be Patuparehere on top of the my perceptions of what could have been Patuparehere on Porongia Mountain. And then the stories that I heard from people who have been in the Te Urarewa or been in the forests around the Ngāhere and Te Reo Māori on these islands, Te Waipounamu, Te Ika Maui, on these 2 islands, these 2 major islands in this domain. The stories of when people hear the singing, hunters and trampers hear singing and they move towards the singing. It's very much the same experience as what Tim Marczenko talks about in this book. It's a disembodied voice, but it isn't someone calling their name. It's a singing that they're hearing. These hunters hear the singing, these trampers hear singing in the forests, like melodic singing in the forest or flute playing instruments in the forest, and they move towards it. They're drawn towards it and they move towards it. But from the accounts that I know of about the Patuparehere and then people that have moved towards these particular singing areas where they've heard singing or they've heard music in the forests, they've never been harmed, which is interesting. There's never stories of people going into the forests, listening, hearing singing, and moving towards it in this country that I know of anyway, who've been hurt in any way. They haven't fallen down cliffs and broken legs or hurt themselves. Often they'll turn up 3 or 4 weeks later after search parties have gone looking for them. They couldn't find their bodies, couldn't find them, with dogs following their trails, with people in the search groups looking for them, were in the areas where they was last seen, not finding them, and then 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later or a few days later they just appear in an area and they walk out of the forest remembering nothing but hearing the singing and walking towards the singing, and then walking out of the forest without being malnutrition. There's some motorbikes over there racing around in the sand dunes. That's what the noise is. Hearing these voices and moving towards these voices, but not coming out of the forest with any signs of malnutrition, dehydration, illness, hypothermia. Their clothing's intact often as well. Like, you hear these stories with missing 411 in the United States, and they're horrifying stories, most of them. But here, when people hear these voices, hear the singing in the forests, or hear music playing, often flute playing in putorino, which is the Māori flute, or a flute playing, a form of flute in the forest, a flute kind of sound in the forest, and walk towards it. Often these experiences that these people have, they're not harmful. They're the opposite. They're the opposite, which makes me wonder if there's a correlation here between what Tim Marczenko is talking about and writing about in his book, Disembodied Voices, and the Patuparehere in the forests of this part of the world. Whereas actually the forces that are here, the Patuparehere, the people in the Te Ora the Tuhui call them the people of the mist, or call themselves the people of the mist, of course, excuse me. But the Patupare Here, the first people, or the fairy folk, the fae in this part of the world. Maybe they're not harmful, maybe they're benevolent. You know, I don't know. But just interesting, that correlation between hearing someone calling your name, but in this part of the world, often it's music or singing and hunters moving towards it. As I've told a story before about when I did that video on Porongia about the hunter who went missing for 3 weeks and then walked out in the northeast corner of the Te Ora, walked out and then came back down around and was found walking down a stream, and the last thing he remembered was moving towards the singing, and that was it. He didn't remember anything else for 3 weeks, and they found he walks out fine. No malnutrition, no dehydration, clothes intact. Where does he come from? No one knows. He doesn't remember anything. And there's many stories that I've heard from people about the Patupare Here, or hearing singing or hearing flute playing in the middle of the forest and people walking towards them. You know, it's something I can't give an answer to. There's too many questions around that. But I haven't heard any stories before in this part of the world where disembodied voices have called out from the forests for people to walk into the forests in this part of the world to get lost and never be heard from again. Thanks for watching. I truly appreciate it. Put this up here. Thanks Tim Marczenko too. What a great book. I'm really enjoying it. And to the Brothers of the Belief Hole, thank you so much as well for your podcast. I really love it. It's such a great podcast. Mateo. I'll see you again soon.